So welcome to today's webinar, Work Readiness for Brain Injury Survivors. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Rachel Ishak, and I am a community outreach specialist at the Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey. And the Alliance is a nonprofit organization with a mission to provide education, awareness, prevention strategies, advocacy, and support for those who have been affected by brain injury. So I would like to announce that we have some upcoming events just to stay on your radar. We'll have a professional seminar coming on May 8th of next year, but then we also have some more webinars planned for the rest of this year and into the new year. On December 14th, we'll have a webinar called Transportation Resources for Brain Injury Survivors. So please tune into that one. I will put the link in the chat so you can register for that one. And then we'll have another webinar in January on the 26th called Making the Most of Assistive Technology for People with Brain Injuries. So you'll be able to find more information about that on our website as the date approaches. Now, just a few housekeeping notes before we begin the presentation. Attendees' microphones have been muted, so if you have any questions during today's webinar, please type them in the Q&A box, and we will get to as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. The webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing later on. And at the end of the webinar, a link for a post-webinar survey will be placed in the chat. We value your feedback, so you are encouraged to complete the survey. And you must complete the survey in order to receive a certificate of attendance. So our presenters for today's webinar are Tiffany Cabrera and John Takaz. Tiffany holds a bachelor's degree from Rutgers University in psychology and cognitive science and a master's in clinical psychology from Loyola University. Tiffany has clinical experience working in hospitals and various rehabilitation settings, administering neuropsychological assessments, and providing cognitive remediation services to the pediatric and adult populations. She has worked at UI Rehab since 2017. She first served as a cognitive therapist and eventually became heavily involved in the development of the client work program. She then transitioned into the vocational space and assisted in developing work options focused on vocational development and skill acquisition. She now holds the position of Director of Vocational and Cognitive Therapy, where she oversees both the client work program and the cognitive therapy team, which supports clients in vocational and avocational skill building through clerical work, gardening, woodworking projects, community outings such as fundraising and 5K events, volunteer opportunities, event planning within the rehab, and more. So I am pleased to welcome Tiffany Cabrera.
Thank you, Rachel, for the intro. I'm just going to share my screen. I have some slides for you guys. Okay. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk about this topic. It is an area I'm pretty passionate about. So when we're talking about vocational development, individuals with traumatic brain injury, the one thing to know is that for most of this population, many of our clients prior to their injury, of course, had lives and jobs. And in my experience, I've worked with engineers, individuals on Wall Street, people that were in finance, construction workers, nurses, and so on. And due to their circumstance currently are unable to necessarily return to what they used to do. So I'm going to talk about a lot about how we can develop vocational options that can assist with providing meaning and fulfillment for our clients, which in turn will improve quality of life. So let's jump into it. So in the program I work in, the first thing we do is an assessment. So typically when I'm working with individuals with TBI, a lot of the times many may voice interest in work, returning to work, or doing some sort of vocational skill training. Sometimes these clients may be referred by family members, and sometimes, just working with them in therapies, people may say they're a good fit for our VOC program. So a lot of the times we will do an interest survey to start. So first thing I want to know is what the client's interested in. What hobbies do they have? What were they doing prior to their injury? A lot of the times their history definitely helps with that too. And what are some of their current VOC interests? I would say it's pretty typical for a lot of our clients to want to just return to what they used to do. So I do take all of that into account when I'm doing my interest survey, but that's always step one. What are they interested in? What do they like? Even if a client may say they don't know, I will try to probe for some hobbies. I may even ask them what kind of environments they enjoy being in. Do they like to be quiet and to themselves? Do they prefer to be with other people? So any type of information that can kind of help me gauge where their interest lies. At Universal specifically, I usually ask regarding if they're interested in computer work, creative arts, woodworking, if they enjoy assembly work, maybe putting furniture pieces together, maintenance work and janitorial duties. Those are a lot of the voc options we have here in-house at Universal. So I will ask that in addition to maybe some other things I didn't list. Again, their previous voc experience and maybe some hobbies they may have. Once I have a whole, arsenal of different things that I know they like to do, I will take some time to create a situational assessment. Because all of our clients are just all very different, I always do the interest survey first. It's usually about an hour or so. And then based on what they tell me they're interested in, I'm going to prepare a couple mock work assignments. So if I have a client who tells me they're interested in paperwork, I might set up a sorting assignment, as you can see depicted here. If I have a client telling me they're interested in computer work, I'm going to probably prepare some sort of computer assignment. When I say prepare, I mean I'm going to list a series of instructions, have the client maybe sit in front of a computer and just see what they can do. Some of our clients may say they're really good at the computer, but then you put them in front of it and might have a lot of difficulty. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of, the considerations that we'll look at when we're doing the situational assessment. But again, just setting them up with just a mock assignment and see what they can do. So I would say the computer work and clerical work is pretty common. If a client's interested in doing assembly work, I might, maybe put some furniture aside they can help me put together. Some of the questions I'll ask myself is if they're able to follow instructions. Do they know how to, for example, turn on a computer? I want to see what the client is able to do without support first. So those are some of the things I'm looking at during the situational assessment. There also are some considerations during this point in the voc process. I'm always also looking at cognition. Again, a little bias here, that is my background too. So I'm asking myself, is the client oriented? Do they know where we are? I met with them for the interest survey. Do they remember where the voc space is now for the situational assessment? I'm looking at attention. Are they able to stay on task? And I'm looking at attention because I want to know what environment might work best for this client. So are they easily distracted? Is stuff in the room distracting? Are they just distracted by their own thoughts? I'm also looking at processing. Are they able to process the information I'm telling them? Do they benefit from maybe having instructions written? Do they benefit from me providing more simplified instructions? So those are just a few of the components of COG that I'm looking for. If I have a client that, let's say, is able to demonstrate attention, processing, orientation, and maybe even recall, now I'm kind of looking at components of executive function. Is the client able to follow a series of steps and execute it? Will the client advocate for support if they're stuck on something? So during this whole assessment process, I'm just asking myself a million questions so I can really understand their interests, their strengths, and also some of the areas of difficulty. And if there are areas of difficulty, what I can integrate to support. So if, let's say, cognition is not a factor, the other area I'm going to look at is physical ability. So is the client able, let's say they want to use the computer, are they able to move their hands? If the client's using a power chair, is the table the right height? So there are a couple different things I look at, and I'll get more into that in the next slide. I'm also looking at endurance, not necessarily or not always physical endurance, but I'm also looking at mental endurance. Is the client able to stay on task for 15 minutes or more? Can they do half hour? Can we bump it up over time? So those are some of the things I'm looking at as well. And then, as I kind of mentioned before, I'm also taking a look at the environment. Will being in just a big workspace be A, overstimulating, or B, too distracting? And if so, okay, how can I create an environment that doesn't have as much distractors there? So these are all things I'm asking myself and taking into account when I'm trying to get an idea of what would be the best kind of voc options for the individual I'm meeting with. Okay, so for the next slide, I'm talking a little bit about some of the things we'll integrate to adapt and modify. So I mentioned in the previous slide, one of the considerations is physical ability. I may have a client that might not necessarily have any cognitive deficits impacting the work they're interested in doing. However, we might have some physical limitations that are getting in our way. So these are just some examples of some of the pieces of equipment that we use pretty often here in our VOC program. And it's very simple stuff, but it does make a huge difference. A big one I would say is something as simple as the height of the table. I had a client in the past say that it was very hard for him to type, that he felt a lot of tension in his shoulders, and it was because the table was just too high. So something as simple as just lowering the table to the height that's comfortable was able to improve his endurance. He was able to type longer because now he's in a position that's comfortable and more relaxed. We do have adaptive mouses that we use. So if a client doesn't have the fine motor control in their fingers, they're able to use an adaptive mouse. And then the enlarged keyboard is another one that we use pretty often as well. In the picture, I have a client here using a universal cuff that was put on by OT. So occupational therapy will help us out with a handful of our clients to apply cuffs that are good for that particular client. So for this in this picture, very simple, but all we had to do was lift the keyboard up to, you know, a 60-degree angle, and now he's able to type. So this is one of our clients here. He comes here twice a week and he types. He's worked on writing his own book, and he sometimes is just given separate typing assignments as well. But we make that simple adjustment with propping up the keyboard. We apply his universal cuff. This is a table that does adjust. So we adjust it to his height and he's able to type, and he works the full hour twice a week. So again, making those adjustments, sometimes the way the keyboard is oriented does play into effect in terms of if he's able to type the keys. So sometimes it's just like very small, subtle things will make a huge difference in terms of endurance and the client's ability to execute their tasks. I'm sure there's a ton more pieces of adaptive equipment. I know I've seen head mouses in the past. There's a ton of different things. These are just the ones we use at our VOC program, and I think are pretty popular here. I use it with a handful of clients. Okay, so after doing the situational assessment, the interest survey, the situational assessment, I'm taking into consideration COG, physical limitation, endurance. Once that process is done and I kind of can see where the client is in terms of we've found, you know, some VOC tasks that they're interested in. I know what pieces of adaptive equipment they might benefit from. And now I know what kind of supports I can provide for them to execute their work responsibilities. My next question is, what are the client's goals? So once I provide a client with a task, I do want to know, you know, what they'd like to do long-term. So here are just some quotes from just what clients have told me recently. Honestly, these are pictures of clients here at our rehab in our VOC space. So clients have told me they want to learn how to use a computer. They might be able to type and maybe copy a piece of paper and type stuff down, but now they want to actually learn how to navigate the computer. Another one would be recycling. I've had a client here in our program say that they want to recycle everything in our rehab because people aren't doing a good job recycling. And another one would be maintenance work. So first thing I do is make sure that I find a way to just break it down into steps. In order to learn how to use the computer, let's figure out, are you able to use a typical mouse and keyboard? Do we need to, you know, integrate some adaptive equipment? So that's question one for me. Number two, are you able to navigate just through the desktop, right? So just simple things like that. If a client says they want to learn how to use the computer, I typically might work with them anywhere between 1 to 2 times a week, and make sure that what I'm doing is consistent to support some of the carryover. For the client here that wanted to do recycling for the whole rehab, we kind of ended up breaking it down very, very simplified and had them, what is recycling, right? So what are we recycling? So those are the bins that you guys are seeing in this photo. And right now we're just recycling within our vocational space, where we have a group of clients who are going through the recycling, making sure everyone is recycling properly. If people aren't, what can we do to advertise to make sure people are recycling things properly? And then there's a trip to the recycling center. So that's what I mean in terms of breaking it down into steps, mainly because I want to do my best to promote our clients' independence, right? It might be easy for us to say, okay, like just fine, we'll recycle, I'll just take you to the recycling center with me. But I try my best to make sure clients are involved in every step of the process. And that may be a helpful tip, whether you work in a rehab setting, whether you're a caretaker. There's so many things that we do on a day-to-day that we might not even think about, but involving these individuals is amazing, because then they feel this sense of fulfillment and purpose, doing something that they chose, they enjoy, and then seeing it actually kind of go into effect. So this client in particular, when it comes to her recycling, she is loud and proud about it. So yeah, it's very cool to see them enjoying that. The other option I have here listed is maintenance work. So again, we had clients say that our group room was very, very boring, which they were 100% accurate. So during this client's vocational training, the first step was, okay, what are we going to do with this space? Are we going to paint? Are we going to do wallpaper? If we're going to paint, what's the design? Why? Should we have other people vote? So there's just so many components that go into the planning process. And especially for some of our clients that we're focusing more on executive function, again, involving them in every step of the process is targeting both skills. When we think about going into the community and applying for a job, right? We might be going on Indeed, looking for a job, making a resume, a cover letter, submitting. There are so many steps that go into everything we do. And even if, let's say, we're not talking about typing a resume and sending it to, a job, another job, even just breaking something down into steps is still targeting vocational skills. Okay. So my next area here is supported employment. So during many of our clients' work shifts, after we do, again, interest survey, situational assessment, and go through the considerations, we have staff here on site that will provide one-to-one support to clients as needed. There are some clients that can be set up and do the work independently. There are others, especially for some of the assignments that require a couple more steps where they benefit from support. So the job of our employment specialists here that we have depicted is to ensure that our clients are doing the assignments correctly. This is very helpful with skill building, right? Because immediately in the moment, if let's say there's an error happening, we're able to provide the correction, we're able to, provide a demonstration of how to do the task accurately. Our supported employment that we have here at Universal is mainly in-house. However, I know there's supportive employment options out in the community as well. So some of the other things that we've done here at our rehab is janitorial duties. We have a couple clients that enjoy cleaning and that kind of stuff. So we've sent clients to supervise during their work shift. So essentially the employment specialist, again, is just ensuring that the clients is on time, doing their work accurately. If there's any errors that they're being corrected. And again, having the employment specialist definitely helps with some carryover as well. This is great for many of our clients that, again, may struggle with doing some higher level vocational tasks, but with the support of our employment specialists, they're able to do them. And again, many of the projects, for example, painting the cabinets here, our clients feel a sense of fulfillment because these are things that we're using, they're able to see it displayed and they're able to see it used. So even if, let's say, you're a caretaker with taking care of somebody with traumatic brain injury, you can even think of things around the house that maybe they can assist with. So yeah, them being involved in anything, again, gives them some sort of meaning and fulfillment, and that's what matters. Yeah. And then my last point here. So another thing that we do really focus on at our VOC program is how do we promote independence? Especially we do have a couple of clients that want to work more. So different ways to promote independence is, I'm kind of thinking back from a cognitive perspective, is targeting orientation. Okay, well, if you want to be more independent, step one is transitioning to this VOC space on time and during your work schedule. So I listed here visual aids because the schedule, it's usually the first thing, right? So every Monday at 9:30, you come over here to work. I want you to come on your own without me prompting you. So those are some of the things very simple things that I'll do to start supporting our clients and promoting their independence. Even if they might not advocate that they want to be more independent, I think working in this environment without even realizing it, a lot of our clients become dependent on prompting, right? Because we're just, as clinicians, we're always prompting, we're probing, whether it's in therapy or even in the VOC space. So one thing I've worked on as a clinician is making sure that I'm allowing the client the opportunity to be as independent as possible in their work. Some other options. So let's say now I have a client that can follow the schedule. I may create a checklist of the different tasks I want that client to complete in one sitting. It might be something as simple as grab the pile of papers on the table and shred them. So the other thing I might integrate to take it a next step is I have a couple clients who I'm working on promoting that independence with that have specific work folders. So their job is to transition to the vocational space independently on time as per their schedule and grab their work folder, which has instructions on what they're being asked to do. Of course, we are always here in the space and they can self-advocate, but those are just some easy, quick examples of how we can promote our clients' independence, is just supporting that transition and initiating the start of the VOC task. Again, employment specialists and even myself will always be available to assist during the execution of that task, but just the actual transition and initiation, I think, is a very big step. Right? Do you show up to work on time? Reminding our clients, my boss does not call me to bring me to work. So transitioning over on time. The other thing that can support our clients in promoting independence is allowing them to become familiar with a specific assignment. So a couple of the pictures you see here, client on the left was always doing different maintenance pieces. So anytime I had something to build, I would give it to him. We had a big work order of a bunch of chairs that needed to be assembled. So I gave it to him. It was good because it was repetitive. So if we allow the clients to do something that's ongoing and consistent, that will support carryover, especially from a COG perspective. If the client's able to remember how to do something, they're going to be able to do it more independently over time. Some things to consider when we're thinking about independence as well is orientation. So is the client oriented, safety awareness, and stress tolerance. These are more considerations I would assume when clients are working out in the community. In-house, I do stress tolerance is a big one because our space is fairly large and there's many clients here in this space at one time. So ensuring that they're able to tolerate their peers. If they're not, what are some things we can do to help de-stress in the moment? So something as simple as if the environment's getting too loud, putting on headphones. So those are some simple things to help clients kind of tolerate a busy work setting in our rehab at least. The client on the right is sitting on a blanket. One thing that she started doing in therapy was hand knitting blankets. And over time, she created very, very big interest with this and started selling them. She was originally being supported by one of our COG therapists in communicating with people and advertising it. And now she does it on her own because making these blankets and selling them became so repetitive and consistent. She eventually gained the confidence to go and handle those transactions independently. So she will advertise about her blankets. She will take orders on her own. She will communicate with whoever is purchasing the blanket. So again, sometimes it's a confidence thing as well. So something to keep in mind. Sometimes our clients may be able to do something independently. They just need that extra push and they need someone to just believe in them. And then our client in the middle here, just engaging in some clerical work. This was a big order of about 200 holiday cards that he had to stamp, and he worked on them over the course of a couple of days because it was repetitive. Once he showed up in front of the table, he automatically knew what he needed to do. So overall, I would say that's the goal when I'm trying to work on independence with some of our clients, is integrating something ongoing, even if it's not exactly the same, integrating similar tasks to support that carryover. And once the skill is learned and acquired, then maybe I can move on to something else. And that is it for me, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Tiffany, for that informative presentation. And now I'm going to introduce John to Kaz. But I will just remind you that if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to, or the Q&A, and we'll get to it at the end. So John has been working in human services for over 35 years. His experiences include both vocational and residential work with people who have mental health challenges, TBI, intellectual and developmental disabilities, autism, Fragile X syndrome, and deaf and hard of hearing. John started in direct care and has held supervisory and management positions. He also served as a supervisor at a traumatic brain injury rehabilitation center where he headed the pre-vocational department. For the last 20 years, John has worked for the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation as a vocational rehabilitation counselor and is currently working a program planning and development specialist, overseeing several contracts, including the statewide Assistive Technology Center's lending libraries, Spinal Cord Injury Early Intervention Initiative, and pre-employment training contracts. He is currently the DVRS liaison for the State Behavior Planning Council, the Commission for the Blind and Vision Impaired, and the Veterans Administration. He is a certified rehabilitation counselor and possesses a certificate in supported employment. And so now I am pleased to welcome John.
Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to join you today and provide you information about the Division of Voc Rehab Services. 10 things to know about the Division of Voc Rehab Services. Next slide, please. What is vocational rehabilitation? Vocational rehabilitation is defined as a process that an individual with a disability goes through in order to gain, maintain, or return to employment. There are a number of individuals that work together to help you through this process. You may find yourself working with people in the medical field, as well as career counselors, job coaches, and other advisors. Your individual needs will determine how many people you work with and what roles are needed to aid in your successful entry into the workplace. These needs will also determine the length and overall complexity of the process. Voc Rehab services are federally mandated. Every state has VR services. Next slide, please. Who would benefit from vocational rehabilitation? To avoid just anyone from gaining benefits from vocational rehabilitation, you must prove your eligibility. The easiest way to do this is to show that you're getting SSI, which is Supplemental Social Security Income, or SSDI, Social Security disability insurance. Special education students or others who receive additional accommodations in school may also be eligible along with individuals with severe health conditions. Here are the eligibility requirements for vocational rehabilitation services. You must have a physical, emotional, mental, or learning disability that prevents you from being able to hold a job or need the help of vocational rehabilitation services in order to get, maintain, or return to a job. You will benefit from having a job that vocational rehabilitation services will help you get and keep. Next slide, please. What services are available through vocational rehabilitation? There are a number of services offered to you if you're able to take part in VR. Keep in mind that not all of these services will apply to your situation. These are the vocational rehabilitation services that may be available to you. Diagnostic evaluations, research options for you based on assessments, helping you set goals for yourself, planning interventions, providing you with counseling and guidance to help you return to work, finding ways to limit the impact of your condition on your ability to work, helping you learn to self-manage your condition, managing your case, referring you to other people who can help with your case, developing a team of people to provide the best service for you, career counseling, help identifying possible careers, help getting a job coaching support to help keep a job, assistive technology if needed for the job, classes to teach independent living skills, apprenticeship programs and on-the-job training, self-advocacy training, analyzing and developing job opportunities, providing job placement services to get you into a job, ongoing evaluations of your ability to work. It's easy to see how these services will allow you to find and keep a job no matter what barriers you may have. Despite the number of people that will likely be involved in your case, you will primarily work with just one person, a vocational rehabilitation counselor. Next slide, please. Steps in vocational rehabilitation. The first is referral. VR referral, as well as PREAT's youth referral, can be found on the DVRS website. Referrals are given to the local office in the county in which you reside. If you complete an online referral, give it 24 to 48 hours to receive contact from the local office. Online referrals are sent to our central office and disseminated to local offices. You can also print the referral and mail or email to the local office directly. Second is the intake. Think of this as the informational interview. The Voc Rehab counselor will ask questions to better understand your abilities, interests, and barriers. We're often asked, what can someone do to prepare for an intake? If you have any medical records, child study team records, assessments, bring them with you to the intake or provide them to the Voc Rehab counselor ahead of time. This helps with the next step. Third is eligibility. In order to determine if you are eligible for services, the Voc Rehab counselor will review records you may have provided, possibly send you for diagnostic evaluations, and obtain medical clearance to work. The Voc Rehab counselor reviews the student or client to determine their strengths and weaknesses. Next is the development of an individualized plan for employment, also known as the IPE. This is to find out if there are issues that might withhold the assessment of a job. Thus, some of these questions follow. What field would you like to work in? Do you have a similar field that interests you? What position do you seek in the specified vocation? Do you have any limitations while working in a similar environment? Is training needed to obtain employment in that field, among others? Once the individualized plan for employment is developed, then voc rehab services begin. A successful rehabilitation or case closure comes when you're employed for at least 90 days or more in the community. If additional services are needed in the future, you're always able to reapply for services. We're here to support you during your working career years. You're always welcome to return and reapply for services. Next slide, please. What is a vocational rehabilitation counselor? The role of a vocational rehabilitation counselor is to help their client overcome barriers to be able to work in some capacity. They will typically have a master's degree in vocational rehabilitation counselor or other human service related master's degree. If you are able to enroll in a vocational rehabilitation program, this will be a person that will be working with you the most. They will be the one to bring in other professionals as needed and will be responsible for creating a plan for your rehabilitation. Here are a couple things to keep in mind when working with your vocational rehabilitation counselor. Always be honest about your condition, your abilities, restrictions, and desire so they can help you as much as possible. Respect their decisions in regards to your next steps towards employment since they are experts in the field. Communicate frequently with them about any problems or concerns you're having so small problems can be solved while they're still small. It's important to establish a positive relationship with your vocational rehabilitation counselor because of the huge role they will be playing in helping you get a job. Next slide, please. What is the Vocational Rehabilitation Act? Because there was a lot of discrimination in the workplace against people with disabilities throughout the United States, the Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Title V, was created. This act did several things to ensure that people of all abilities can work. Here are a few of the actions that came as a result of the Vocational Rehabilitation Act. Employers that have federal contracts of at least $2,500 are required to hire mentally or physically disabled individuals. Employers must now make reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities. Programs are put in place to offer training assistance, vocational counseling, and job placement for severely disabled individuals. In 2014, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, WIOA, the acronym, amended the Rehabilitation Act. It emphasizes the provision of services to students and youth with disabilities to ensure they have opportunities to receive training and other services necessary to achieve competitive, integrated employment. It focuses on exploring and developing more career pathways for sustaining employment, the expansion of supportive employment, and employment engagement. Next slide, please. What are my responsibilities? Your counselor can help you work out your responsibilities through vocational training, but you are expected to do everything you can to prepare for a job. This includes keeping appointments, complete participation in the individual plan for employment, working hard on tests and in training, discussing problems as they arise, and keeping in touch with your vocational rehabilitation counselor. Next slide, please. At what point does the vocational rehabilitation services become involved in the transition process? The transition process can be initiated as early as age 14 or earlier if appropriate. Voc rehab services can be a great source of information for schools. They provide labor law information, employer contacts, current employment-related trends, and events happening locally. They can also help you learn employers' expectations of employees, connect workplace activities with your academic program, and discover the significance of disabling conditions on employment. Vocational rehab services can help young adults gain skills they need to get and keep a job. Work with your teachers and school administrators to make sure that applying for the Division of Voc Rehab Services is on your IEP or Section 504 plan. Don't wait until late in your senior year to apply. Make sure you fill out an application so that DVR can make a formal decision on your eligibility well before you leave the school system. Remember, services may be unique to you. Don't hesitate to discuss your needs with your counselor. Next slide, please. It's my life. Who will make the decisions about my VR program? Me, my parents, my counselor, or the school? You will make the final decisions that fit your own career interests, abilities, choices, and goals. The best situation is one in which everyone works together to plan the vocational rehabilitation program that will enable you to reach your career goal. Next slide. A career or a job. The purpose of vocational rehabilitation is greater than landing a first job. The Rehabilitation Act requires that people with disabilities have an active voice in choosing employment goals in keeping with their interests and abilities. The Division of Vocational Rehabilitation does not set limits on services and will help as long as the person is progressing towards their employment goal and participating actively in that direction. Someone with a desire and aptitude to be a lawyer, doctor, scientist, or minister should not settle for a job as a receptionist in the firm where those professions are practiced unless it is the only step in the plan that goes further. Career goals should be consistent with a person's strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, interests, and informed choice. Now, I know this spoke a lot towards young folks, but for people who are re-entering the career, we do look at their current abilities and limitations and being able to retool and doing those assessments as Tiffany had mentioned during her presentation. The next slide, please. This is our contact information in our central office. And in our next slide is our local offices, which we cover every county in New Jersey. And in our next slide is my contact information. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you.
Great. Thank you so much, John. That was a fantastic presentation as well about the different services that are available out there. And so thank you, Tiffany and John, for your presentations. And so I would encourage everybody in the audience to take some time to complete the post-webinar survey as we value your feedback. And so I'm going to take a few questions now while that post survey is being placed in the chat. So I'm going to check our Q&A here, and we can get those answered. So a question came up, I think during Tiffany's presentation, but I think it applies to both Tiffany and John. The question was, do you help with resumes?
Yes. So I have had, prior to COVID, we had Voc options in our human resource building right next door. And we did work with a handful of clients on creating resumes. Even how do we describe the work that they're doing here at the rehab onto a resume. We've also worked on cover letters as well. So during that process, we've had clients submit cover letters and resumes. I do have just a small handful of clients that currently have resumes, but yes, I have worked with clients on developing resumes. What should a resume look like? There are a bunch of great templates on Microsoft, so that definitely helps. And also cover letters as well.
And yes, the Division of Voc Rehab Services most definitely helps with resumes. And also we're learning that the local libraries are partners. They also are helping with the resumes too.
Oh, great. That is wonderful information to know. Thank you. And then another question came in. Do you have any recommendations for how we can implement this into a day program model with OTs, speech pathologists, and PTs? And do you have any resources that discusses considerations if they were to try and do this?
Great question. I love that. So I do know a couple facilities may not have a whole voc space. I know during COVID specifically, our voc space was closed. We actually did transition all of our voc into the day program space. I have a couple ideas that come to mind. If you're trying to integrate it into a day program model, I know I mentioned it a lot during the presentation, is just trying to get what the client's interest is. There's so many things that we can integrate. It's just important to kind of see what the clients are into. Some ideas that come to the top of my head is maybe starting with consistent, ongoing, maybe group discussions. For example, let's say every week there was a photography group, or maybe every week there was like a cooking group. And I say that because then there's a planning component to it where the clients can be involved in the steps needed to execute something like that. So if, let's say, day program had a cooking group, who's going to be in charge of the dishes, who's going to be in charge of gathering the supplies, who's going to be in charge of going on that grocery outing to get everything we need. So those are just simple ways that we can kind of integrate it into a day program model. Another idea is that you can even, let's say, create a small corner that maybe might have some clerical work. So I know my experience with day program, there are a ton of structured activities. They might be coloring sheets or crossword puzzles or packets of just activities. You can always have a client maybe be the person to staple and hand out those packets. Let's say there's a flyer. You can have someone in PT assist the client in walking around and posting that flyer. So it's just about getting a little bit creative. But I think the first thing would kind of see what majority of your clients are interested in and then kind of go from there. I have one more thought on that one. You can also create vocational kits. I know that's something we started doing here at the rehab. So essentially, let's say you have bins of, let's say, a bunch of supplies. So pens, markers, Post-its, and you can have a client sort it. You can do a bin where it's folding laundry, stuff like that. So even if, let's say, maybe it's not paid work, you're still targeting voc-based skills, doing the sorting and the different steps. So those are just some ideas that come to the top of my head, but definitely see what your clients are interested in and you guys can go from there. I know speech OT and even PT over here at our rehab, once you start throwing out ideas, get pretty excited about doing that kind of stuff. And if your program kind of wanted to take it another step further, I know when Universal first started their voc program here in our New Jersey and now in our PA location, the first thing we did was create a store space where clients were actually working the store, selling items. It's like chips and coffee and toiletries, things like that. We started in a very small space and now it's kind of grown. But that's another idea in terms of integrating voc more from like a day program perspective. I don't have specific resources in mind. There are a couple of resources if you look at vocational kits to get ideas for that. I think kind of leave it up to the clients and see what they're interested of seeing more or less of, and then go from there.
Great. Thank you for that answer, Tiffany. And then there was a question just wanting to confirm that, John, you were from the DVR program. So yes, he's representing the DVRS program. And then somebody asked a question, is there any training testing their level of function so that they can be appropriately placed? Because this person was mentioning they were in a situation where their service program provider wanted them to engage in a job that was minimum wage and kind of below their skill level. And so they're trying to figure out how to navigate that and be in a situation that more appropriately suits their abilities. Do you have any guidance on that?
That'd be more for you, John.
Right. Repeat the situation again?
So I guess they were in a situation where they were placed at a job that was kind of below their skill level. So they want to figure out how they could go about maybe getting into a different type of job, or just being able to test their level of functioning to be able to show that they're capable of more, perhaps?
Right. Yeah, I think it goes back to the relationship with the voc rehab counselor and communicating, because it sounds like they utilize services through supportive employment. And if they need to provide the feedback that they're, may not be the right match for them.
Okay,
That,
great.
that,
Yep, so communicating with their vocational rehabilitation counselor.
counselor, yes, yeah, because job satisfaction is so important. And it may be seen, as in the presentation it talked about, it may be a stepping stone, but it's not. If it's not the right match, it's not going to work for that person, and the counselor should be fully aware of that, and it may not be the right vendor that's being used.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
On our end, Rachel, so the assessment we give is a cognitive therapy assessment. So sometimes a lot of the factors that are involved in learning skills is, correlated with COG. So we do a cognitive therapy assessment, so that might assist too, assessing specifically for recall, attention, those kind of things. But again, that's a little more specific, just like to our program, because I oversee both. But I know looking at making sure that we're taking into account different cognitive domains as well. And like John mentioned, communication with the counselor. So I feel like the counselor should be well aware of that and be able to hopefully find a better placement.
Great, thank you. Had a couple of questions asking if the recording will be accessible afterwards, and the answer is yes. We're going to put it on the website, so that'll be available for you to watch back and be able to take notes, because I know it was a lot of information. All right, we have a question here saying that this individual has a client who is not currently working and they don't have a license, and they would love to get the person into a vocational program. Do you have any guidance for them getting into a vocational program?
Go to the Department of Labor and look for the Division of Voc Rehab Service to fill out a referral. So it gets routed to their county.
And that actually ties into a question we have here, is how could somebody get connected to DVR? It sounds like they go to the website and they can fill out a referral form on the website.
Yeah.
Okay. Could they also call? I know we had a bunch of phone numbers listed earlier, or does it have to be done on the website?
Yep.
Okay.
A referral could be taken over the phone. I could put the website in the chat.
Okay, that would be great. Please do. Okay, and then we have another question. How can you increase motivation and client buy-in to participate in pre-vocational pursuits? Maybe Tiffany, you can speak to that one.
Motivation, that is a big one. I would say when we're talking about just voc, it's a little easier because we do have a paid work program, right? So clients are motivated by money and making money, right? As all of us are. But when it comes to pre-voc, that could be a little bit challenging. I think first thing I think about is what is the client interested in and how can I integrate that into my pre-voc task? I think there is flexibility in really trying to make anything voc-based. So I'm trying to, I don't know if the person can give me like a specific example of something they might be interested in.
I don't know if they're able to.
Okay, that's okay. But yes, I know I keep mentioning the interesting and it might sound pretty repetitive, but I feel like that's the only way to find motivation. Some people are motivated by, just hanging out with friends. Maybe that might be a thing, or communicating with loved ones. Okay, so if you want to communicate with a loved one, then you might need to use a computer or maybe send an email. So I'm always trying to find what motivates them, even if it's not voc related, and then find ways to turn that into a pre-voc task. Sometimes the options we have here may not interest the client, so it's up to us to kind of get creative and explore. I did have one of my most recent voc clients that I'm working with currently. He was interested in doing just like maintenance work at a supermarket. And even though he was motivated by that, because of his physical limitations, he wasn't necessarily able to do things the same way anymore. So we had to get creative and see what can be maintenance related but he's able to do without getting too fatigued because of these physical limitations. And now we do laundry for the rehab. So it's just a matter of finding what they're interested in. If we're not able to necessarily do what they're interested in, maybe because it's not within our means, or maybe because they don't have the ability to do it currently, how can we get creative to find something close or similar? So that's usually what I look at. I feel like every time I meet a new client, I'm throwing something new into our VOC program, because, you know, everyone's going to come in with a different interest. So I think finding what their motivator is, even if they may not tell you, it's if they're not willing to be open or talk about it, sometimes it's just trial and error. I hope that's helpful.
Great, thank you, Tiffany. Next question is, what formal assessments are you using to determine strengths and weaknesses? Could be either of you if you want to.
So I guess this is a little more specific just to our program. So because I oversee cognitive therapy and VOC, we use our COG assessments often. I haven't used anything formal to assess specific VOC skills, just because our clients are also different and we're looking at all of those different considerations I mentioned. It's a little challenging to be able to measure on the same scale someone who maybe isn't able to speak, but cognitively they're there, versus someone that maybe they're not able to use their hands. So it's been a little challenging. So I don't use anything formal. Typically what I do is I try to integrate something ongoing where the client might require support, and then over time slowly try to take components of that support away to promote that independence. So that's kind of how we've measured it over time. Again, nothing formal, it's more like individualized and situational. But in terms of like the COG assessments, is the formal assessments we use in conjunction with just looking at the skills they're able to do independently over time.
Ours is more medically based, where it might be a neuropsychological evaluation, psychological physiatrist report, or OTPT, and or coming from Tiffany, you know, of pre-vocational cognitive evaluation.
Great, thank you. This question asks, what kind of communication or conversations do you have with the client's current employer? Not quite sure what the context of that question is.
Well, for returning to work, if we were working with a former employer, everything needs a signed release with HIPAA, and it's driven by the client, you know, in a working relationship with the consumer. So the involvement is based on what their desire is and moving forward, and partnering with them.
Great, thank you. Someone's asking if you have any recommendations for identifying community partners for supported employment in the community.
Yeah, our vendors work with numerous amount of employers, and are able to do site evals. That's the crux of the work that we do, is and being able to do placements, and we have a number of internship sites that we're developing now.
And John, just a follow-up question, that just to clarify, so if somebody gets connected with DVRS, are they then connected with a vendor agency in the community to do the supported employment, or is DVRS the one providing that one-on-one support?
No, we're a funding source where that we provide the services and contract with vendors to provide them, in that, you know, there's thousands of consumers that we provide services to. We utilize the vendors in the community rehab programs.
Great. Okay, so if they're looking for community partners, they would really go through DVRS to get connected maybe to some of those. Okay, great. There's a question from someone here that says, What would you recommend for a supported employment vendor who is working with a TBI client and doesn't have that background information on their strengths and weaknesses? Would they go back to the DVR for assessments, or can they do an assessment through the vendor itself?
Can you repeat that, please?
So this person, it sounds like they are a supported employment vendor themselves, and they're working with a client who has a TBI, but they don't have any information on the person's strengths and abilities. So would they get that from the vendor themselves, or do they have to go to DVRS to get that information about the person?
It should come with a referral when they receive the voucher, as well as in working with the person should, communicate the information. But usually a referral packet contains the information.
Just in general, would the vendor have contact with the voc rehab counselor? Would there be a kind of a line of communication, or once they have that referral done, it's not a lot of communication?
If DVR is sending a referral to a supportive employment agency, then they would be providing that information.
Okay. Thank you. I have a question here saying the person has a sister who would like to go back to school, and her TBI happened before she graduated from school. Does DVR provide educational support if she does want to go to school?
Yeah, it would be in their best interest to reach out to DVR and look at every case is seen individually, and to look at the options of returning back to school and completing it. I don't know the nature of her TBI and her abilities to fully answer that, but it would be great if she could do that.
Great. Yep. So I guess just starting with a referral and seeing what can come from that. Great. Somebody's asking, do you have any links for any type of assessments that you use? I guess either for Tiffany or John. I know, John, you mentioned it's mostly medical, right? That you have assessments mostly.
How many links?
Have any links for assessments that are used?
I'm not understanding the question.
I think they're asking if you do you use any assessments to determine any strengths and weaknesses? Can you share links to those assessments? But it sounds like from DVR's end, it's mostly medical documentation, not so much a formal assessment that you would be conducting. So I don't think there are links for those. But I don't know if Tiffany, you have any.
I have so I have links to purchase the formal badges. I don't necessarily have a link that would direct you straight to just an assessment, because they're COG, and then I've also done neuropsych evals too. Can I provide links a little later? Is that okay, Rachel?
Yeah, maybe
resources? Okay.
You can send them to me, or even if the person can reach out to you and maybe you guys can connect. If you want to provide your contact information in the chat, maybe you're able to.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. Just because I don't have them available right now, but I can definitely send something over.
All right, great. Well, we're a couple minutes over, and I think we've run out of questions anyway. So I'm going to wrap up here. But thank you all so much for attending, and for John and Tiffany sharing with us today. It was very important. And if you guys have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to us here at the Brain Injury Alliance, and we can get your questions answered if they weren't answered today. So I'll put my information in the chat, and just a last reminder to fill out the post-webinar survey, and I'll also put a link to register for our next webinar if you're interested in the chat. So we hope to see you then, and this concludes today's webinar.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks, everybody. I appreciate everyone's questions and just coming on here. It was great. Thanks.